During our chapel today, I'm most excited to hear from our student and alumni presenters about how we can thoughtfully understand the things we are experiencing as a country and a community during this week. And I hope that you can find some wisdom here, some hope and compassion, and that we can think as a community about how to move through this week gracefully and thoughtfully. We'll begin with some representatives from our political science class. I'd like to invite Augustus, Alex, and Katie to begin our presentation today.
Hello, my name is Katie Kern, and I'm here with Augustus Hickman and Alex Hodson to share some observational takeaways from our political science class.
But first, remember to vote. We sent out an email this morning with an electronic ballot for our school's mock election. Practice democracy, influence the roll call vote, and learn about some of the issues on this year's ballot.
Okay, back to our presentation. 3 political science reminders as you think about election day today. So 2020 isn't just about the presidential race. Down ballot issues matter too. Most people are preoccupied with the presidential race, but there are dozens of issues on the ballot that might affect you even more. Which party controls a majority in the Senate will determine foreign policy, judicial nominations, and whether or not the president can pass their agenda. A Biden presidency, but a GOP Senate might mean nothing gets passed. The governor will determine our COVID response as a state, and state legislators determine what services and priorities get funded, and school board members affect public schools. And there are even this year amendments to the Constitution up for consideration. So what does all this mean for you? Look for results to be happy about. There are a lot to choose from. Realize that political power exists throughout all government, and local politics might matter to you more every day. Put the entire election in context and watch for all the results.
Remember, we may not know all the results tonight. They might be too close to call. COVID-19 has disrupted everything, including the electoral system. The good news is that more people have voted early and voted by mail than ever before. 14 million people have already voted. However, there are many challenges: mail delays, shortage of poll workers, and long socially distanced lines, all taking place in 14,000 different voting jurisdictions. This video displays the predicted outcomes of each state in the days to come. Remember, each state determines how it will run its election, so decisions will be made in real time about how to clarify results. Many races could be too close to call, and counting will have to continue for days, maybe even weeks. There's even a chance that a candidate will contest the results or demand a recount. So what does this mean for you? First of all, brace yourself. It's okay that we don't know immediately. Let the system, rules, and procedures that are in place run its course. Second, scrutinize the information you see on social media and the news. There will be competing media narratives about what's happening and who won. Your job is to educate yourself.
Also, something to remember is that democracy will persist if we make the system work for us. That means our cultural contributions do matter. Remember that our democratic system is designed to be a little bit messy. Also, democracy is a never-ending project. The fight for what you believe in never ends. Every election feels like the most important of our life because they all matter. 2022 and 2024 and every legislative session in between. Also, there is a system in place that makes it pretty much impossible for the results to be overturned by a candidate if that's something you're worried about, because there are election officials and nonpartisan professionals that count the votes and work to keep everything fair. What does this mean for us? Political participation mattered before 2020, and it will matter after. The fight for what you believe in is never over, so speak your mind. Peaceful transitions of power begins with each of us. Work to build trust, dialogue with others, stay educated, and stay engaged.
Next, I'm thrilled that we have a guest with us here today. 4 years ago, Will Matheson was a senior at Rowland Hall, and since he graduated, he's been engaged in study and research at Harvard University, and recently published an article, an opinion piece for CNN. And the title of that article was Gen Z, Don't Give Up on America Just Yet. So Will, I'd like to invite you up here. Thank you for coming back to campus, at least our virtual Rowland Hall campus today. It is so good to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Innes, for that warm introduction. And I'd like to thank Mr. Innes and Dr. Hickman as well for inviting me here today to speak. I'm class of 2017, and I am thrilled to be back here so soon. I have absolutely missed Roland Hall. It was, so I feel old already, but it was some of the best years of my life, and I'm just really honored to be back here and speaking with y'all today. Of course, you might know me best as Harris Matheson's older brother, and he's probably out in the audience today, so hi, Harris. So yeah, I've been working at Harvard on this poll, this public research opinion tracking, and I'd like to share some information with you now. I'm just gonna share some slides. Over the past 4 years, I've been tracking young Americans' political beliefs and engagement to better understand what this generation really believes. It's part of this group called the Harvard Public Opinion Project. It's part of our school's Institute of Politics. And it was created about 20 years ago to try to understand why young people cared a lot about things like community service, but they didn't really care about things like voting or running for office. And a couple of the students at my school really wanted to understand why. Ever since then, we've been tracking how youth feel through things like focus groups and a poll that we run 2 to 3 times a year. Each year, the students get together, we think about what the major issues are facing our country, and then we poll young Americans to understand what their beliefs are on it. And for that, I'd actually like to start with just a quick overview of polling. We basically poll this group of 18 to 29-year-olds. It's the largest poll of them in America right now. And what this means, all this fancy talk basically means we get a representative sample of young Americans across all types, ethnicities, income, education levels, gender, etc. And we make sure that this is sufficiently, there's sufficient breadth to understand what young Americans really believe. And that's the reason I'm here today, is to share with you what we've learned about youth civic engagement and how that shapes how we can think about this election. So before I jump in, actually, I just want to acknowledge, yes, you are high schoolers. I'm guessing many of you are probably not in that 18 to 29-year-old range, but the results, I think, are still pretty generalizable to Gen Z overall. So the first takeaway is that we're more alike than it might seem. We have a lot of shared policy goals. You can see on this slide the results from our most recent poll. Young Americans across the board, regardless of Democrat or Republican, they care about things like mental health services or the consequences of the pandemic or addressing race relations or healthcare issues. We've also found in our research over a longer period of time that things like gun control and student loan debt are really important for this generation across the board. And this is really interesting because while not all young Americans are on the left or on the right, they do share this set of beliefs that is something that's really unique to this age group that you don't see among older cohorts. Now, the second takeaway is that we're more engaged than ever before. You can see that we're projecting really high turnout, potentially higher than 2008 in this election. And this really matters because young Americans also believe that voting is the most important way to make change. You can see that unlike 20 years ago when we started the poll, people really care about the democratic processes now. They care about politics and governance, and they're really engaged with what's happening here. So this is good. We have shared priorities, and we have a high level of engagement with the system. But how does that shape how we think about this current moment? And for that, I'm going to stop sharing slides here and just speak directly. So this is a grave moment in America. There's a virus that's imperiling our health and our economy. Systemic inequality is preventing us from fulfilling our nation's promise, and our faith in one another is fraying, and with it, our civic culture. And we know that regardless of how this election turns out, these are going to be challenges that will still confront us, in the next year, in the next 5 years, potentially longer than that. And we do well to remember that every generation has faced its own challenges that were, similarly great. And those generations that rose to those challenges brought progress. And I say this because we should think about this election as a moment in a broader episode of history. Look, I know most of you today are not able to vote. And look, if you are 18, if you can go vote, you absolutely should. But I also suspect that like a lot of the 18 to 29-year-olds that the poll looked at, you share a common dedication to some shared goals like improving mental health or race relations or an economy that better uplifts all Americans. And those changes won't be determined by this election alone. So while this election really is important, creating a fairer, more just society is going to require you in the months and years and decades to come. So with that, I have 2 specific asks of you. The first is to vote. Once you're able to vote, vote in every single election you can. The whole purpose of a democratic system of governance is that it's the best system to reflect the interests of those that engage it. And I'd argue that that system works best when it reflects everybody's interests, and that means that everybody needs to engage it. The problem here is that young people usually don't vote, which means that you are disproportionately not being heard. And to be honest, you ought to be. As a voting bloc, your vote matters a great deal. I talked about the 2008 election and why that was such a big level of turnout, and that's because the youth vote was a crucial factor in that election, and we anticipate it's going to be a crucial factor in this one too. But those two elections are really exceptions to the rule. Most times youth don't turn out. And we talked about those shared priorities that young people had, mental health, race relations, better economy, a better environment. But the system has to be impacted by youth over time to make progress on those issues. So turning out in every election, at every level of government matters. Now, my second ask is less concrete, but it's no less important. We discussed how our civic culture is fraying and how that's corroding our faith in one another and our democratic institutions. So I ask that you become the best citizens you can be. We know that the previous generations that rose to the challenges that faced them did so not by pointing a finger, but by extending an open hand. And Roland Hall actually does a great job at instilling these qualities and skills in y'all. We need to embody qualities like curiosity, empathy, humility to admit when we are wrong, just common decency and respect, things like deliberate thinking skills and critical thinking. It requires both hard skills like being a smart media consumer, but also soft skills like being able to talk with people that you might not agree with. Once we've done that, only then can we begin to really heal our civic culture. So to conclude, this is a crucial time in our history. We also know that previous generations have faced similar moments as well, and future generations are going to face their own. And to be frank, regardless of the challenges we face today, we know that 10 years down the line, we'll probably face another set of great challenges. And 20 years after that, we'll still face great challenges. In other words, we've got our whole lives ahead of us with a bunch of different challenges we're going to face over time. But we know that for as grave as these moments are, only in trial is progress possible. It requires all of us with big hearts and open minds. Thank you.